What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices meets one of television's most controversial hosts, and the conversation takes a turn nobody saw coming? Today we're diving into the explosive encounter between Morgan Freeman and Joy Behar on The View that ended with security being called and Freeman walking off set. This is a story about respect, professionalism, and what happens when both collide with ego and agenda. Before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really went down here. The morning started like any other at the View Studios in New York. Morgan Freeman had arrived early for what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance for his latest documentary about American history. The legendary actor, known for his measured words and dignified presence, sat quietly in the green room reviewing his talking points with his publicist. At 76 years old, Freeman had done thousands of interviews, but something about this particular booking had made his team nervous. Joy Behar, meanwhile, was in her element. As one of the longest-serving hosts on The View, she had built her reputation on being unfiltered, confrontational, and willing to tackle any guest on any topic. Her producers had briefed her on Freeman's documentary, but Joy had other plans. She had been following some recent controversies surrounding Freeman and saw an opportunity to make headlines. The show began normally enough with the usual banter between the hosts. When Freeman was introduced, the audience gave him a warm reception. He walked out with his characteristic calm confidence, took his seat next to Joy, and exchanged pleasantries with all the hosts. The first few minutes went smoothly as they discussed his documentary project, with Freeman speaking eloquently about American history and the importance of understanding our past. But Joy had been waiting for her moment. As the conversation naturally wound down from the documentary topic, she leaned forward with that familiar gleam in her eye that regular viewers knew meant trouble was coming. "Morgan, I have to ask you about something else," Joy said, cutting off Whoopi Goldberg, who was about to ask another documentary-related question. "There have been some allegations made against you in recent years, and I think our viewers deserve to hear your response directly." Freeman's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. His publicist, watching from backstage, felt her stomach drop. This was exactly what they had hoped to avoid. "Joy, I thought we were here to discuss the documentary," Freeman replied calmly, his famous voice carrying just a hint of warning. "That's what was agreed upon with your producers." Joy smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Well, Morgan, when you come on a talk show, especially one like ours, everything is fair game. We don't shy away from difficult conversations here. That's what makes us different from those softball morning shows." The other hosts exchanged glances. Whoopi looked uncomfortable, clearly wanting to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Sunny host seemed intrigued but cautious, while the others appeared to be waiting to see which way this would go. Freeman took a breath and responded with the patience of someone who had dealt with difficult interviews before. "I understand that, Joy, but I came here in good faith to discuss a project I'm passionate about. If you want to have a different conversation, perhaps we should have scheduled a different kind of interview." "Oh, come on, Morgan," Joy pressed, her voice taking on that tone that viewers either loved or hated. "You're a public figure. You've made millions of dollars from the public support. Don't you think they have a right to know about these serious allegations?" The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Freeman's jaw tightened slightly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades in Hollywood. "Joy, what I think is that there's a time and place for every conversation, and there's also such a thing as due process and treating people with basic human dignity." Joy laughed, a sound that carried no humor. "Due process, Morgan. We're not in a courtroom here. This is daytime television, and our viewers are smart enough to hear different perspectives and make up their own minds." "Are they?" Freeman asked, his tone still controlled, but with an edge creeping in. "Or are they being fed a narrative by hosts who have already made up their minds before the conversation even begins?" The studio fell silent for a moment. Joy's smile faltered slightly, but she wasn't backing down. If anything, Freeman's pushback seemed to energize her. This was the kind of confrontation that made for viral clips and social media buzz. "I think our viewers can handle the truth, Morgan," she said, her voice rising slightly. What they can't handle is celebrities who think they're above accountability just because they have a famous voice and a successful career. Freeman looked directly at her, and for a moment, the full weight of his presence filled the studio. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried more authority than any shouting could have. Joy, I've spent my entire career trying to use my platform responsibly. I've never claimed to be above accountability, but I do expect to be treated with the same respect I show others, something that seems to be in short supply at this table. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Joy's face flushed slightly, and the other hosts looked increasingly uncomfortable. What had started at Joy trying to create a moment had turned into something much more serious. A fundamental clash between two very different approaches to public discourse. Joy leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. Respect is earned, Morgan, and it works both ways. When you come on our show, you don't get dictate the terms of the conversation. Freeman's response would set the tone for everything that followed, and nobody in that studio was prepared for what came next. Freeman sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. When he spoke, his voice carried a new tone, one that everyone in the studio recognized as someone who had reached their limit. Joy, let me ask you something, Freeman said, his words measured but sharp. How many people have you built up in your career versus how many you've torn down? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've made a living out of the latter. The studio went dead silent. Joy's mouth opened slightly, clearly not expecting Freeman to turn the table so directly. The other hosts looked stunned, with Whoopi actually leaning forward as if she might need to intervene. Joy recovered quickly, her voice rising with indignation. Excuse me. I've been doing this job for decades, and I've held powerful people accountable when others wouldn't dare. That's called journalism, Morgan. Freeman's laugh was low and rumbling, but there was no warmth in it. Journalism? Is that what we're calling ambush interviews now, Joy? Real journalists do their homework, they ask thoughtful questions, and they listen to the answers. What you're doing is performance art designed to generate clicks and controversy. How dare you? Joy shot back, her professional composure starting to crack. I have every right to ask you about allegations that have been made public. That's not ambush journalism, that's doing my job. Your job, Freeman repeated, his voice taking on that commanding tone that had narrated countless documentaries. Let me tell you what I think your job should be, Joy. Your job should be to inform, to educate, to elevate the conversation. Instead, you use your platform to tear people down for entertainment value. Joy's face was re-inning now, and her voice became sharper. Don't you lecture me about my job, Morgan Freeman. I've been fighting for women's rights and social justice since before it was trendy. I've used this platform to give voice to people who otherwise wouldn't be heard. Have you? Freeman asked, tilting his head slightly. Or have you used those causes as a shield to justify your behavior? Because there's a difference between fighting for justice and using justice as an excuse to bully people on national television. The other hosts were now looking back and forth between Joy and Freeman like spectators at a tennis match. Sunani tried to interject. Maybe we should all take a breath here and know. Joy cut her off sharply, her eyes still locked on Freeman. I want to hear this. Please, Morgan, tell me more about how I'm a bully. This from a man who has had multiple women come forward with stories about inappropriate behavior. Freeman's expression hardened. Joy, those allegations were investigated, and I addressed them publicly at the time. But even if they hadn't been, even if I were the worst person in the world, it wouldn't change the fact that your approach to this conversation has been unprofessional from the start. Unprofessional? Joy's voice cracked with disbelief. You're calling me unprofessional? You're the one who came here expecting some kind of puff piece interview, and that got upset when I asked real questions. Freeman leaned forward slightly, his presence somehow filling more space in the studio. Joy, I've done real interviews with real journalists who ask tough questions. The difference is they did it with respect, with preparation, and with the understanding that their job is to seek truth, not to create drama. So now, I'm not a real journalist. Joy's voice was getting higher, and the other hosts were looking increasingly alarmed. I'm saying that real journalists don't ambush their guests, Freeman replied evenly. They don't make assumptions and then demand that their guests defend themselves against those assumptions. Real journalists listen. Joy slammed her hand on the table, causing her coffee cup to rattle. I am listening. I'm listening to the women who came forward. I'm listening to the people who don't have platforms as big as yours to tell Their stories. Freeman's voice remained calm, which seemed to infuriate Joy even more. Are you listening to them, Joy, or are you using them? Because there's a difference between giving people a voice and using their pain as a weapon to attack someone you've already decided is guilty. I haven't decided anything, Joy protested. I'm asking questions that need to be asked. No, you're not, Freeman said, his tone becoming more forceful. You're making statements disguised as questions. You've already made up your mind about me, about this situation, probably before I even walk through that door. This isn't an interview, Joy. This is a trial where you've appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. That is completely unfair, and you know it. I have every right to ask these questions, and frankly, your refusal to answer them says more about you than any answer could. Freeman also stood, his full height and presence now dominating the space. My refusal to participate in your circus doesn't say anything about guilt or innocence, Joy. It says something about dignity and self-respect, concepts that seem to be foreign to you. The insult hung in the air like a thunderclap. The other hosts looked shocked. The audience was completely silent, and Joy's face had gone from red to pale in seconds. Did you just call me undignified? Joy asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Freeman looked at her steadily. I said, your behavior lacks dignity. Yes, there's a difference between holding people accountable and what you're doing right now. Joy's voice exploded across the studio. My behavior. You're the one with the questionable past, and I'm the one with the behavior problem. Yes, Freeman said simply, his calm and stark contrast to her outburst. Because accountability doesn't mean abandoning basic human decency. It doesn't mean treating people like they're already guilty. It doesn't mean using your position to humiliate someone for the entertainment of your audience. Joy looked around at her co-hosts as if seeking support, but found only uncomfortable expressions. Even the audience seemed to be shifting in their seats, the energy in the room having turned from excited anticipation to genuine tension. I can't believe this, Joy said, shaking her head. I ask legitimate questions, and somehow I'm the villain here. This is exactly the kind of deflection that powerful men have been using for years. Freeman's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, though his voice remained controlled. Joy, don't hide behind gender politics to justify poor behavior. This isn't about you being a woman asking tough questions. This is about you being a person who has forgotten that the people across from you are human beings, not content for your show. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel that something was about to break. Joy took a step closer to Freeman, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried more threat than her earlier shouting. Don't you dare lecture me about humanity, Morgan. I've spent my career fighting for underdog, for the voiceless, for the people who get trampled by Hollywood elites like you. Freeman's expression shifted, and for the first time in the entire confrontation, he looked genuinely angry. Hollywood elites, Joy. Do you know where I came from? Do you know what I had to overcome to get where I am? Don't you dare reduce my life's work to some privileged elite narrative just because it's convenient for your argument. Oh, here we go, Joy said, throwing her hands up dramatically. The sob story. Let me guess, you worked hard, you earned everything you got, and we should all just ignore any uncomfortable questions because of your inspiring journey. Freeman's voice became deadly quiet, each word carefully enunciated. Joy, my journey isn't a sob story, it's my life, and the fact that you would mock it, reduce it to a convenient narrative, shows exactly who you really are. Joy whirled around to face the audience as if seeking their support. Do you see this? This is exactly what I'm talking about. Ask a powerful man a difficult question and suddenly you're the bad guy. Suddenly you're the one with the problem, but the audience wasn't responding the way Joy expected. Instead of supportive applause, there were uncomfortable murmurs, and many people were looking down at their hands or shifting in their seats. Freeman noticed the audience's reaction and spoke directly to them, his voice carrying that familiar authority. Ladies and gentlemen, you came here today expecting entertainment, maybe even some drama. But what you're witnessing isn't journalism. What you're seeing is someone using their platform to bully a guest and then playing the victim when called out on it. Joy spun back around, her face flushed with rage. Bully, I'm asking questions that need to be asked. I'm doing what journalists are supposed to do. No, Joy, Freeman said, his voice rising for the first time. Journalists seek truth. Journalists show respect for the people they interview. Journalists understand that their job is to inform, not to destroy. What you're doing is using your position to attack someone you've already judged guilty. Whoopi finally tried to regain control of the situation. Okay, everyone, let's just take a step back here, and no. Joy cut her off again, pointing directly at Freeman. I'm not backing down from this. This man thinks he can't come on my show and dictate how I do my job. Freeman's laugh was sharp and bitter. Your show, Joy. This show has 4 other hosts sitting right there who haven't been able to get a word in because you've turned this into your personal vendetta. This isn't journalism. This isn't even entertainment. This is just sad. The word sad hit Joy like a physical blow. Her voice became shrill. Sad, sad. You want to see sad. Sad as watching women come forward with their stories only to have men like you dismiss them, minimize them, make them feel like they don't matter. Freeman's composure finally cracked completely. Joy, those women do matter. Every person's story matters, but that doesn't give you the right to use their pain as a weapon. That doesn't give you the right to assume guilt. That doesn't give you the right to abandon every principle of fairness and decency. Don't you talk to me about decency, Joy screamed, her voice echoing through the studio. Don't you dare. Freeman stood perfectly still for a moment, looking at Joy with an expression that was part pity, part disgust. When he spoke, his voice was quiet again, but it carried more power than all of Joy's shouting. Joy, I've tried to have a respectful conversation with you. I've tried to explain why your approach is wrong, but you're not interested in conversation. You're not interested in truth. You're only interested in being right, even when you're wrong. Joy's voice cracked with emotion, though whether it was anger or something else was unclear. I am right. I am right to ask these questions. I am right to hold you accountable. Freeman shook his head slowly. Joy, accountability, and assassination are 2 different things, and what you've done here today is character assassination. Pure and simple. Character assassination. Joy's voice reached a new pitch. Your character assassinated itself. I'm just shining a light on it. Freeman looked at her for a long moment, then turned to address the other hosts directly. Whoopi, Sunny, ladies, I want to apologize to you. You invited me here in good faith, and this situation has spiraled far beyond anything any of us intended. Whoopi nodded gratefully. Morgan, we understand. No, they don't understand. Joy interrupted frantically. They don't understand that this is exactly how powerful men have operated for decades. They come in, they charm everyone, they make the woman asking tough questions look like the villain. Freeman turned back to Joy one final time. Joy, I came here to talk about American history, about learning from our past, about building a better future. Instead, I've learned something about the present that genuinely saddens me. I've learned that there are people who would rather tear others down than build anything up. Joy's voice became desperate. That's not what I'm doing. That's not who I am. Freeman's expression softened slightly, and when he spoke, there was genuine sadness in his voice. Joy, I think you might be exactly who you've become, and that's the real tragedy here. The words hit Joy like a slap. For a moment, she was completely speechless, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Freeman looked around the studio one more time, then began walking toward the exit. I'm going to leave now, because this conversation has become something that serves no one. Not you, not me, not your viewers, and certainly not the important issues you claim to care about. Joy found her voice again, calling after him desperately. You can't just walk away. You can't just leave when the questions get uncomfortable. Freeman paused at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. Joy, the questions weren't uncomfortable. Your behavior was unconscionable. There's a difference. As Freeman continued walking, Joy turned frantically to the cameras.